Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening of the academic year of the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute here in Florence. We are a university of 85 different nationalities. We hold the archives of the European Union. We do research and training. And at the School of Transnational Governance, we actually have a wonderful new program of master students on governance beyond the state. Tonight, we have a special privilege of opening the academic year with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Welcome, Hillary. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you for joining us.
I am delighted to be here with you, Alex, and looking forward to our conversation.
Great. And now all of you online and by your screens at home, Hillary needs no introductions. We're great friends and old colleagues. She is a politician, a lawyer, a writer, former professor, first lady, senator, secretary of state, and presidential candidate. But first and foremost, she's a pioneer and inspiration to all of us. Today, we will have a 30-minute conversation between Hillary and myself, and then move on to questions from students and fellows and Professor Calypso Nicolaides. Before we begin, I would also like to recognize the presence online of our President Renaud Dehus, of Senator Mario Monti, former Prime Minister of Italy, and José Manuel Barroso, former President of the European Commission and Prime Minister of Portugal. We'll talk today around 5 themes and move pretty much from the personal more toward the public. So the first question, Hillary, is to and about our students. I mean, you of course have a background in education and in law, and at the University of Arkansas, when you were teaching there a long time ago, I found a wonderful quote. They said, Hillary, rigorous teacher, tough with grades, but really good. So what, Hillary, is your advice to the young students that we have here, 35 of them from 20 different countries, aged between 22 and 28. They all want to go into public service, private sector, academia, civil society, perhaps journalism. What kind of skills do you think future leaders need to have?
Well, Alex, it's a great pleasure to talk with you and also to the online audience, particularly the students. And I love the idea that you are emphasizing transnational governance. So the first thing that I would hope that your students would recognize is that we have to do a much better job of applying rigor and analysis to the problems that we face that cross borders. And in today's world, that's a lot of problems, starting with COVID and climate change, but we could go on. And I wish that there would be a real openness to learning best practices, what works in different countries that can be applied more broadly, what works that can be brought to scale. And I think that requires not only an intense focus in the area that might be of interest already to students, but a willingness to accept a more generalized body of knowledge and to expose themselves, to different points of view, different kinds of approaches in government, in the private sector, in philanthropy, because this is a moment that I think COVID has offered us, despite all of the loss and the suffering and the dislocation and the economic consequences. This is a time to say, what can we learn and how can we better deal with the problems we face and work together? You've got a perfect setup to do that at the Institute, and I really applaud you for starting a master's program as well as the PhD and postdoc work that you're known for, because we're going to need all hands on deck, because right now it's unclear the best ways for governments to respond that are going to try to mitigate the damage and provide a better foundation for more equity, more justice, more as our president-elect likes to say, building back better.
Yeah, a lot of it is about multidisciplinarity, isn't it? I mean, you need to look at
Yes.
things from different types of angles. And I mean, of course, you know, these students here, they've been sort of dropped off the deep end in many ways. That first they come here, they do a 2-week quarantine. Then some of the classes are online. There's a lot of instability and insecurity. So, you know, when we were studying, it sort of seemed a little bit easier. But what would you tell students in the COVID era about, you know, online teaching and these kinds of, I mean, are we ever going to go back to physical teaching, or is it just going to be online all the time?
I think we will go back to physical teaching, but I also think we have seen the potential of online learning and teaching in a broad scale way that can give us a better idea of how to blend the two. And certainly while being online, you know, use this time to explore and connect with your fellow students, with faculty members, even in the broader academic world, to, you know, listen to lectures, to be part of a real online experience, to try to make up for the loss of the in-person learning. I don't think that online learning is yet at the level of effectiveness that in-person learning has been when it's done well, but there still is a lot of good opportunity out there. And I think professors and teachers are learning more about how to keep the attention of the online learner. We're also learning more about how exhausting it is to sit in front of a screen trying to absorb. So I think for each individual student, there has to be a recognition of, you know, how much you can actually learn before you have to, you know, turn away from it, and how you can better take advantage of the offerings that are available, certainly at the Institute and in the transnational governance space, but beyond that, because this is a moment to really fill up that reservoir of learning and interest and curiosity, so that when we finally get back to in-person learning and interacting, you're going to come out of it with a lot of new ideas that you'll be able to test.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that we've found here is that, you know, some students react differently. They might be more gregarious and more talkative online than they are in class, and then vice versa. So you get a lot of different aspects, and I think for our professors as well, it's been a sort of a wow effect. Okay, this is how I can teach as well. But let me move on to the second theme that we'll discuss today, which is sort of related, and it's about pressure. And really from two perspectives, because I mean, you could argue on one hand that the students right now are undergoing a lot of pressure. It's a new situation. They're away from home. They have to study. The curriculum is tough. They're online, you know, there might be illnesses involved and the rest of it. So that's the personal pressure. How do you deal with that as a student?
I really have a lot of concern about students who are undergoing exactly what you just described, Alex. I see it and hear about it here in the U.S. There's a sense of dislocation. This is not what any of them expected their education to provide. And I hope that there are resources that people can go to. I mean, if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling, you know, really lost, is there somebody they can call? Is there some service that can be made available to them so they understand that this is not unique to them? This is a big experiment that we are conducting on them. You know, we've advanced so quickly with technology that I think we've pretty much outpaced human evolution. I hope we catch up. But there's so much evidence now that, you know, being online, and particularly in social media, but to a lesser extent, online learning, carries with it, you know, new challenges that you have to have a better sense of yourself to be able to deal with. So don't be worried, and frankly, don't be ashamed to ask for help. I mean, if you are feeling you're not absorbing information, that, you know, that you literally at the end of the day feel disoriented, as some people have reported, seek out somebody to talk to and figure out how to break your learning, your online learning, into smaller bite-sized pieces, because this is a brand new experience for the human race, not just for students, but for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, keep on going to different kinds of places. I was talking to my daughter yesterday. She's studying in London, and she said it helped a lot when she found different study places in the library, and so move around. Now, what we're doing here is trying to teach the future leaders. And you know, out of your 7 books, I've read Living History, Hard Choices, and What Happened. You know, I'm not a stalker or anything like that. Don't worry, Hillary. But I mean, I found them, you know, because the narrative is wonderful, the story is phenomenal. You know, the first one talks about all the way up to when you were First Lady, the second one then about Senator and Secretary of State, and the third one then about what happened 2016. Now, I remember when I was in office, the pressure was hideous. I mean, it was just constant. But I know that for you, it's probably been 100, if not 1,000 times tougher. And I know that, you know, I went and cried on my wife's shoulder and you know, lamented to my friends that this is not fair, this is not fun. But what's your advice? Because you've taken it all, you've seen it all, and you're still smiling. And you know, what's your advice to our students here, how to handle pressure of public life?
Great question, and Alex, you've held nearly every position, so you have a set of perspectives that are also very valuable. Look, I think there are a couple of things. One, I'm a big believer in keeping yourself physically healthy, physically active, physically prepared, because stress is so insidious. It can come at you and just knock you down, and you don't even know where it came from. So being as physically strong as you possibly can to withstand whatever happens in your life. And that seems particularly important during this time of the virus. I also think, you know, trying to feel that you have people you can lament to, family members and close friends. I could never have gotten through everything that I've done in the past decades without people who I knew cared about me, had my back, would give me honest criticism. You know, you're not seeking yes people, you're seeking, you know, those who will say, okay, well, maybe you could have handled this a little differently, you know, out of love, not out of mean-spiritedness. So having that circle of people that, and maybe it's just one person, but, you know, obviously a few more would be a better option if you can. I think thirdly, and this is something, I don't know about you, but I had to learn very early on to take criticism seriously, but not personally. And here's what I mean by that. You know, people will criticize you for many reasons, and a lot of them have more to do with them than with you. Yeah. People will criticize you, especially if you're in politics and government, for their own reasons. They oppose you, they're your rival, they have a different point of view, they're pushing a different outcome, whatever the combination of reasons might be, and you're the target. If you took every criticism personally, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, because there's just so much of it that comes with the job. But you do want to take legitimate criticism seriously enough to learn from it. So practicing that, like, okay, what's the motive behind this comment or this, you know, this ad hominem attack? Try to sort that out. And if it's telling you something that you can learn from, take it on board. If not, ignore it and go on. Do not let the critics drive you to your knees and make you doubt yourself and give up on yourself or twist yourself to please them, as opposed to doing what you think is right.
You know, it's so nice to hear, and I mean, I guess the experience to a certain extent is similar, and you have to have a human face on it. And I think the key is that you just have to get up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and think that you're doing the right thing. But one of the problems that I've found a lot in politics is that people start looking at their own identity through the media. And I think that's when you sort of run into trouble. You have to just put that aside. I myself also, I mean, I had my wife, my dad, and a good friend called Kai, who were always there, you know, when I had a big problem, I could give him a call. And it feels good, because a lot of people forget that behind every politician, there's a human being with real feelings. And the moment that your skin supposedly gets so thick that you don't have a backbone anymore, that's when you're in trouble. You always have to have the empathy and sensitivity. And that's what I felt, you know, when I met you personally so many times. You always had that. And that was a wonderful sort of sense that you could see that, wow, you know, the Secretary of State of the United States, she has the same kind of feelings that the rest of us do as well.
You know, Alex, let me add something to what you said, because I agree completely. I actually think it's harder right now because of social media.
Yeah.
As intense as journalism and media criticism has always been for people like us in the public eye, it is so amplified online. And I started a podcast in September, and one of the people that I just interviewed is Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of the state of Michigan in the United States. And some of your students may have run across her, but she has had to deal with COVID, and she's made really tough decisions, which has prompted a vicious reaction by those opposing her. Really white supremacists and militias showing up fully armed at the state capitol. And it got so bad that a plot to kidnap and kill her was recently disrupted. So this is a woman who has done what she believed was right for the people she served. And when I was speaking to her on my podcast, I asked her, how do you balance all of that? And I thought her answer was, right in line with what you said. She said, I just tried to do what I thought was right. Yeah. And yes, what I thought was right was hard to do. And the blowback and the terrible attacks that came toward me, and then even a threat of physical danger, are hard to handle. She said, but I try not to think about that because I have a bigger responsibility. When she said that, she reminded me to some extent of Angela Merkel. When Chancellor Merkel faced the immigration crisis, faced the COVID crisis, she's been very matter of fact, and it's never been about her. It's been about what she thought was right for, Germany and her people. And I think that's a saving grace if you can stay focused on that. And I said to Gretchen, Gretchen, Governor Whitmer, a lot of the people who are opposing you. They're on the other side of the political aisle. They're Republicans in Michigan, and they're in the media. And I said, how do you think about them? And she said, I don't know how they look at themselves in the mirror every morning. I don't know how they get up and don't tell the truth about the dangers of this virus, don't confront the dangerous people who are out there. So you do have to believe you're doing what is right. Now, some people can disagree with you, but you get a sense of purpose and a certain level of self-protection if you think, I'm doing the best I can, I'm trying to do what's right, and I'll take the consequences of that.
I don't think you can have a better lesson than that for our future leaders and go through the argumentation that you made, and we'll keep that in mind. Let's move to the third theme, which is kind of linked to this, and it's your role as a Secretary of State. When we met for the first time, 2009, 10, 11, and I looked at your track record after. It's funny to say in COVID times, but do you remember that you traveled 1 million miles? That is 38.5 times around the globe, 401 days of travel during 4 years, 112 different countries, total of 214 countries. And did you know that you surpassed the traveling record of Madeleine Albright, whom I think you're having a conversation with today? When you came to Finland in 2012, that was your 98th visit. So, I obviously went back and I looked at all the different issues that we were dealing with at the time. The Middle East, the Arab Spring, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Russia, Egypt, Iran. And that's kind of when you knew where American foreign policy was. There was a sense of stability because, you and President Obama were in charge. So let me begin by asking you, what was your biggest challenge during the 4 years as Secretary of State?
Well, the initial big challenge was really summed up by then President-elect Obama when he asked me to be Secretary of State, because we remember the financial crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and as he said to me, we're facing the greatest economic collapse since the Great Depression, and we have to do a lot to repair relations around the world to deal with our problems. So I'm going to deal with the economy, and I need you to go out and, and go to, go travel 1,000,000 miles and go to as many places as you can and try to, reassure people and deal with problems. So that was the initial, set of directions that I had. I think there were several, if I could. One, obviously, from the United States perspective, Iran posed a very difficult challenge.
Still does.
Because still does. In the prior 8 years, there had been a concerted effort by the Iranians to obtain enough highly enriched uranium to create weapons, nuclear weapons. So I had to put together a coalition in the Security Council to impose international sanctions on Iran, and we did that. And by the June of 2010, we had even Russia and China on board, and that took a lot of focused attention, because only once we got the entire world behind the proposition that Iran with nuclear weapons would be extraordinarily destabilizing in the region and beyond, could the negotiations, which I started and which were completed by my successor, John Kerry, begin. Now, sadly, President Trump pulled us out of the Iranian agreement, and unfortunately, we know that Iran has proceeded to develop a lot of capacity that is quite a problem. Secondly, on climate change, remember the conference in Copenhagen in December of 2009, the climate conference? Well, the Obama administration was very focused on making sure that we could get some kind of global agreement, knowing how difficult that is and, frankly, how hard it is to enforce. And so it took 8 years of concerted effort to try to reach the Paris Accord. And then Donald Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accord, and we're the only country out, and Joe Biden will put us back in. But those are two really thorny problems that I was dealing with literally on a daily basis that just are so complicated and require global attention. It's not the United States alone, or even the US and Europe alone. It requires a global commitment to deal with either one of those. And finally, the problems that arose from the Arab Spring, the very unfortunate situation in Syria, the increasingly aggressive role of Russia and Turkey, the much more assertive claim to world influence and power by China. I mean, so there were always these balancing acts going on, trying to deal with the immediate problem, the one on the horizon, and the one that you knew was coming up behind. And that's what makes the job so fascinating, because I don't think there's ever a moment when there's not some big issue that you have to deal with.
And I think especially when you are the Secretary of State of the United States, that's when,
Right.
the burden of global challenges is on your shoulders. And of course, the issues that you just mentioned, starting from the JCPOA in Iran and then moving to climate change, they're still with us, and I think they will continue as such. Let me sort of move on by combining the last two themes, the world today and the world tomorrow, before we move on to the questions of the students. And let me begin by asking a question about the elections that we've just had in the United States, and especially the issue of transition. Now, and linked to democracy, because, we've all seen your concession speech. We've watched McCain's concession speech. We watched George Bush in the early 1990s. But I went back to your book, What Happened, and I found this, I think, wonderful quote from the book. And here it goes. Quote, "Deep breath. Feel the air fill my lungs. This is the right thing to do. The country needs to see that our democracy still works, no matter how painful this is. Breathe out. Scream later." End of quote. I mean, I can just see you sitting there at the inauguration going, I'm biting my tongue here a little bit. Now, of course, the situation is not going to be the same because we've seen the sitting president screaming out loud right after it began. But let me ask you two questions. Can you say a couple of words what you think is a good transition, and then a couple of words about the future democracy, not only in the United States, but more broadly?
Well, those are subjects that we could talk about for a long time. I hope that sometime we get to do that. A good transition is a real hallmark of a democratic governance model. You have to be willing to give up power. And in the examples that you mentioned, when my husband defeated George H.W. Bush, I mean, that was a real blow to him, and we got to know him very well after that. Could not have been more gracious, more welcoming, more cooperative. When George W. Bush defeated, Bill's vice president, Al Gore, again, the handoff was expected and it was done. And similarly, when Donald Trump was declared the winner of our election, Barack Obama invited him to the White House, the transition began. So if you look all the way back in our history to when George Washington voluntarily stopped his presidency after 2 terms, because of course he could have been elected until he died, this is a terrible aberration, and it sends a very troubling signal about the value that Donald Trump and those who support him and enable him have for our democratic system. And it's also, unfortunately, potentially dangerous. Biden has put together a world-class team of advisors about COVID and about the vaccine. With no transition, they're not getting access to government information, government personnel, in order to plan for the eventual rollout of a vaccine. And it's going to cost lives, and it's meant to disrupt and obstruct Biden from assuming the responsibilities of the presidency. Donald Trump has demonstrated a callous disregard for democratic norms and the rule of law, which undergird democracies. He's not alone in that. There are sadly other leaders on the scene today who get themselves elected and then begin to shut down the press so that they don't face press questioning and criticism, shut down their political opposition, begin to favor their cronies and start acting corruptly. We're seeing that. And this is something that threatens democracy wherever it has taken root. We can't ever take it for granted. It's a fragile human invention.
Yeah, and you know what?
We all have to take care of.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Hillary, of course, right now, as we're speaking, the European Council, so the heads of state and government of the European Union are meeting today, and they are discussing the notion of rule of law and how that is linked to membership of the European Union, because we've had 2 countries that have violated them in one way or another, Hungary and Poland. Now, my final question before we go to the students is a bit of a classic in today's day and age, and that is about American foreign policy. I used to say that it was very easy for the rest of the world to understand what American foreign policy and engagement meant. You had one line with the Republicans and you had another line with the Democrats, but you knew where you had America. Now, the past 4 years, it's been a bit more complicated, I must admit. But tell us, please, before I give it over to our students, what is going to change in terms of American foreign policy with a Joe Biden administration?
Well, we'll have the return of coherence. I think there will be a very clear set of objectives that Joe Biden will articulate. He will go back into the climate accord. He is interested in getting back into some version of the Iran deal. He's going to reach out and reassure our allies and friends around the world that America's presence is back, and we're wanting to be a good partner in dealing with both global issues and those that are of particular interest to various of our allies. I think you'll see an underscoring of the importance of NATO, a real support for the rule of law, for human rights. Now, it's going to take a little bit of time to turn away from what has been an inconsistent, incoherent, personality-driven foreign policy. And really, I think future historians are going to have a very difficult time, as we do today, trying to understand what the motivations have been. Some is clearly just crass political calculation, but a lot of it isn't. You know, the bromance that Trump feels for Putin has never been fully understood or explained. So there's a lot of, you know, problems that we are inheriting that we can only deal with by reasserting a more fundamental, frankly, return to normal kind of foreign policy. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same old stuff, because we're living in a different world. And the United States has left a leadership vacuum, which I am very confident from talking with friends of mine around the world in different capacities, has been a real loss, because in the absence of American leadership, there has been very little global progress on climate change, for example, because if the United States is not at the table as one of the biggest emitters and one of the, you know, the biggest guarantors of financial support for a lot of the transition needed, it's hard to make progress. So I think you'll see with Joe Biden, who is steeped in foreign policy from his many years in the Senate, from his time as Obama's vice president, a real eagerness to try to reestablish both American connections and relationships, as well as American leadership on these important global issues.
This is music to someone like myself, who is an avid transatlanticist and believes that the European Union, Europe, and the United States are bound by common values and cooperation. Now, in the next stage of our conversation today, Hillary, I'm glad that you've agreed to take a few questions from our students. We're going to have 3 of them, and then one coming from a fellow, and then a professor. But before we go to that, I should announce to our listeners and viewers today that we have also decided on a patron for our first master's batch of students from 2020 to 2021. And our patron is none less than Elinor Ostrom, who was the first female to receive a Nobel Prize in economics in 2009, and obviously a countrywoman of yours. So with these words, and with a little bit of a picture, I hope on the screens we will invite the first student to pose the question, and that will be Ingrid. Please, welcome.
Hello, Madam Secretary. My name is Ingrid, and I'm from Norway. It's an honor speaking with you today, and you are a big inspiration to so many women and young girls around the world. I would like to ask you, what is your biggest piece of advice for women seeking to obtain leadership positions in governments and politics?
Thank you so much, Ingrid. I think it starts with education and preparation. So you're at a very good place to do both educating yourself about the areas of your interest and feeling that you are increasingly prepared to take on positions of responsibility. I also think, especially for a young woman like yourself, looking for opportunities to work in government, work in politics, to, you know, sort of test your reactions. What is it you like about it? Some people are made for electoral politics. They crave it. They love it. But others feel that they're more useful in some kind of an appointed policy operational role. You need to find out where you are most at home in that kind of arena of public service. I also think you have to understand, as I was saying earlier, that when you're in the public arena, whether it's as an elected official or an appointed governmental official, you have to learn how to deal with criticism. And one of the challenges for young women, and not so young women, I would add, is that sometimes we feel like we have to be perfect. I call it the perfectionist gene. And we worry about whether we're good enough. prepared enough, performing well enough. And you just have to take some risks to see how far your talent and hard work will take you. I now, at this point in my life, have employed many, many young women and young men. And I will tell you, Ingrid, that very often when I would say to a young woman, I'd like to add to your responsibility, I'd like to give you a promotion, one of the first things she would say is, do you think I can do it? And not to be too generalizing, I never heard that from a young man. If I said to a young man, I'd like to give you a promotion and add to your responsibilities, his attitude was, I'm ready, put me to work. So don't let this fear of not being perfect, because none of us are perfect, none of us ever will be perfect, don't let it hold you back from taking on responsibilities and asking for help and learning what you need to know in order to do the best possible job that you can.
Thank you.
We might not be perfect, but that was a perfect answer. And it was lovely to hear. You should know that part of our class on transnational governance holds gender as well. And we have Professor Ruth Rubio, who is really a trailblazer in this field, who works on that. Next question comes from yet another wonderfully interesting person, Zach.
Good afternoon. My name is Zach. I'm from Syria, and I left Syria at the age of 19 and made my way to Germany. So I think you can guess how I got there. So what I wanted to ask you is regarding to the US foreign policy in the Middle East. According to Richard Haas's book, New World Order 2.0, the US foreign policy in the Middle East has been both too excessive, as in the case of Iraq, and also too restrained, as in the case of Syria. What do you think the next US administration's foreign policy towards Syria should be, and how should they interact with powers such as Russia and Turkey, who already have areas of control in Syria?
Zach, that's an incredibly important question, and thank you for asking it, and I wish you the very best as you go forward with your education. I don't think Richard Haas is far wrong. I think sometimes American administrations have thought that they could just overwhelm a problem and fix it, and oftentimes have had unintended as well as predictable consequences because of that, and Iraq is a good example. I think in other cases, as he pointed out with Syria, I don't think we were active enough. You might want to know that when I was Secretary of State, I thought we should have done more to try to avoid what has turned into a terrible human crisis in Syria. So where do we go from here? I would like to see the United States in the new Biden administration play a bigger role in trying to resolve the internal conflicts within Syria. I have no illusions about the leadership changing because it's now supported so strongly by Iran and by Russia that I don't think Assad is going anywhere. But I do think that there needs to be an effort to rebuild civic society, to look for some ways to engage that leadership in a negotiation about the future of the country's autonomy. Because as you point out, Russia and Turkey have basically taken over areas of Syria. And let's be also clear that groups like ISIS had also taken over areas of Syria. And the people of Syria deserve so much better. And they deserve an international commitment to rebuilding Syria within a framework of a recognition of national autonomy and internal agreements about peace and commitment to a more unified future. I have no illusions that that will be very hard. You know, when I was Secretary of State in June of 2012, we negotiated an agreement for a transitional government. I even got Russia on board, and I'm sure it's, available somewhere to read. We were meeting in Geneva. And within 24 hours, Russia disowned it because Assad disowned it. They didn't want to plan for a transition. And we had proposed, a government of experts who could deal with all of the problems of rebuilding Syria. And now, of course, it's even more of a challenge. So I'm not sure that there would be a positive response, but, diplomacy sometimes takes a long time. And I would like the U.S. to say, and to tell the world, we want to be part of helping to put Syria back together. We want to be part of helping to repatriate Syrians who can come back into an environment where, frankly, they are safe and secure. They can rebuild Aleppo and other parts of Syria. And we want to be part of the international community to help them do that. Probably will be dismissed by, Damascus and Moscow and Tehran and Ankara, but you got to start somewhere. And I would hope that that would be one of the long-term commitments that the new Biden administration would make.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you very much, Hillary, for that elaborate analysis. Isn't it funny? I was thinking about Russia, I started as foreign minister in 2008. You started in 2009, if I recall correctly. You know who's still there? Sergei Lavrov.
Got it.
He ain't going to leave. There you go.
Not going anywhere.
Yeah, but things are changing.
What's interesting, Alex, he survived when Putin was president and when Putin wasn't president, when Medvedev was there. You know, he is the constant when it comes to Russian foreign policy.
Almost like good old Sergei Gromyko, There you go. Anyway, but I think the world is obviously changing, and therefore we have a next question from Ma.
Hi, I'm Ma Pengheng. You can call me Ma. I'm from China, and my question is: last Sunday, ASEAN has an RCEP with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So, which would be one of the biggest multilateral free trade agreements. So, what will it impact on U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, and what will U.S. do to respond to China's growth in political and economical influence on this region? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I had hoped, if I had been president, to renegotiate certain aspects of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There were literally three things that I believed needed to be changed for a more effective agreement. When Donald Trump came in, he just rejected it out of hand. There was no attempt to negotiate and try to figure out how to bring the world together. So as you rightly point out, that left a vacuum. And I don't blame China for filling that with its own interests and its own desire to have a dominant role within the trading community that literally stretches from China to Peru. I think the United States under a Biden administration should reopen the option of being part of either that large agreement or another agreement, simply because we need global standards. Part of our challenge right now is that every country has its own standards, behind the border standards, and they're unpredictable, and they sometimes can be counterproductive in terms of raising the standard of living by increasing wages and working conditions, or creating a true market by enabling goods and services from other countries to flow across borders. So I believe we should spend a considerable amount of effort in trying to do two things. One, look for a way to get into or create an additional trading agreement that the United States is the center of or part of, and beginning conversations about standards. When I was Secretary of State, that was, and even when I was a senator from New York, that was one of my biggest difficulties, because I would have businesses in New York or in the United States who would try to trade into the European market, trade into the Chinese or the Japanese or South Korean markets, big markets. And, there were always barriers. you know, your shrimp have to be slightly bigger than they are in order to come into our market. Or your cheese has to have, you know, more fat content than it does. And those were all protectionist measures. They weren't called that. But if we could standardize more globally, I think it would be really good for lifting the living standards and, frankly, the gross domestic products of individual nations and the world as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary. Great answer. And you know, for everyone around the world, and especially Europeans listening, do you see that? It was China discussing about standards and regulations with the United States. So the European Union might be a regulatory superpower. And yes, we do. We legislate on cheese, among other things. But this is what we need. If the US goes back to TTIP and TPP, this is big stuff. Next question comes from one of our fellows, Joshua.
Secretary Clinton, it's really an honor and privilege to have you here with us today. My name is Joshua Gimba, and I'm a policy fellow here at the School of Transnational Governance. With my background in development cooperation, I'm very concerned by COVID's devastating impact on the journey to sustainable development. With many of the world's economies still reeling with severe hardships, what do you foresee is the role of the United States in assisting the global economy to build back resilience and sustainability towards the post-COVID global economic recovery?
Oh, Joshua, thank you for your focus on development and sustainability, because I think those are particular keys to what we have to do in a post-COVID world. Let me make a couple of points that I think all connect to your concerns. The devastation of COVID economically has disproportionately fallen on poor countries and marginalized populations specifically, and in general on women. Women have been forced out of the workforce and find themselves in very difficult economic conditions because of the lack of opportunity to add to the income of their families, support themselves if they're single parents. So any post-COVID recovery needs to focus on those populations that have been most drastically impacted. And we've got to make sure that government action, private sector action keeps that in mind, because otherwise we're going to have even greater inequities in the post-COVID economy. Secondly, we need a global strategy for vaccinating the world. I mean, it is not going to be possible to recover as fully as we should without that. So as we see vaccines coming forward with the provable data that they are safe and effective, it can't be just the developed countries that take advantage of that. So the United States should be a leader in making sure that safe and effective vaccines are globally available. We're going to have to start working again with the World Health Organization, which the Trump administration cut off, because I see the vaccine as a foundation of any kind of building back from COVID. Thirdly, I think that there will have to be a mix of aid and trade, very much focused on trying to lift up economies that have been hard hit. And I'm hoping that with the United States rejoining the Paris Accords and beginning to put a much bigger emphasis again on climate change, that we can see sustainability in both the climate arena and the income arena be primary focuses of international organizations, of private philanthropy, and of governments. So there's a lot of evidence that if all we do is get the developed economies back quickly because of a vaccine and huge financial and monetary, fiscal and monetary help, the rest of the world is going to be far behind. And that's not good for them, but it's also not good for us. And that needs to be one of the organizing principles that the US and others accept as we go forward from this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, Joshua. Now we come to the final question, which comes from an old friend, not anymore a surprise. But you will know that we have been very lucky at the European University Institute. We have recruited the one and only Professor Calypso Nicolaides from Oxford University. Calypso, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you, Hilary, for sharing your thoughts with us at STG so perfectly, candidly, which reminds me of the way you inspired Chelsea's fellow students in my classroom just after 9/11. You stressed then the importance both of US leadership and international institutions if we were going to offer a common threat against the dark forces threatening humanity at the time. So today, for a new generation of students and with the return of coherence on the US front, to quote you just now, I'd like to ask you in closing our conversation tonight, which has been absolutely fascinating, whether you might share with us the greatest fear that keeps you up at night and the dream that you would like to pass on to our children and grandchildren.
Oh, thank you, Calypso, and I'm so delighted to see you again, and congratulations on being part of this great university. You know, I have to confess to having a number of fears. Obviously, the disastrous consequences of climate change, the fear of nuclear weapons proliferation, the spread of disease. I do worry about all of that. But right now, I am very much focused on the internal division and dangers to democracies. And I think we're at a real turning point, Calypso. I think that democracy today has got to be reinvigorated and to a certain extent reinvented. It has to show more results for the great majority of people, and that's particularly true when it comes to economic equality, racial and other forms of equity. And it really is important that those of us who have benefited from the extraordinary opportunities of the last 50 years recognize a continuing responsibility to try to defend, protect, and improve democracies. And I think there's a role for everybody, particularly young people coming up today who want to be leaders in whatever their field. I think have to recognize that without really lifting up and creating a role of citizen that supports democracy, that cares about equality, a lot of what we take for granted today is at risk. You know, we've seen as Alex referenced earlier, we've seen the huge outpouring in Belarus over what a very significant majority of the population thought is an unfair election. We've seen the outpouring in the streets of Poland over over restrictions on women's autonomy and rights. And we know that if we don't stand up to that, whether you're a journalist or a private sector business leader or a political or an academic or whatever form of work you do, we will all be diminished and we will all be put at risk. So that's what keeps me up at night. How are we going to reclaim the importance of the role of democracy and improve it so that it takes into account disinformation and populism and nationalist leaders and tribalism and all of the internal threats that we currently are seeing around the world?
Thank you very much, Hilary, for your answer, and Calypso for your question. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation that we'd like to keep on for a long time, but we've come to the end of the opening of the academic year here at the School of Transnational Governance. Hilary, I can't put into words the appreciation that we have for you opening our year here today. I remember when I was a young student, 1989 to 1993, at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. You remember that?
I do.
I started to follow your career and Bill's career. And the fact that our paths then crossed later on and that you are here now opening our year for our master's student, it means a lot to us. You've always dealt with issues with grace, with dignity, and you've been a great inspiration for all of us. I extend an open invitation for you and your family to come over here to Florence. You will know that this is probably the most beautiful place in the world to study. And we are opening our new headquarters of the School of Transnational Governance, downtown Florence, Buontalenti, next summer. So we just might pop in an invitation. So personally, many thanks, Hillary, to you for coming and joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and the very best wishes to you and the students for this academic year. Thank you for having me.
They are a great bunch. Thank you for being here. And of course, we cannot resist the temptation to finish off with a little video, which basically means that our master's applications for next year are open. Don't worry, you don't have to cycle like we do in this video. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you.
Ciao! Are you Da Vinci or Machiavelli? Come and discover your way to change global policy. Best place to do it? European University Institute's School of Transnational Governance. This is where we train future leaders.